So having just finished The Hobbit, I really, really wanted more. I'm sure every avid reader knows that thing where you finish a book and you want more of it so much that you just have to read something. And you go on to something else, maybe by the same author, maybe in the same series. You know it's not going to quite fill the gap. It's not going to quite satisfy that need, but you do it anyway. I had just finished The Hobbit and I enjoyed it so much that I couldn't resist pretty soon going on to the Hobbit comic. This was published, I think it was in 1989, and it is a beautiful book with beautiful illustrations. It probably wasn't the best move to go onto that from The Hobbit, because The Hobbit, part of the beauty of The Hobbit is how amazingly it's written. The strong descriptions, the lovely literary experience, and you're not going to get that with a comic. Anyway, I did it. As Mrs. Darcy said, further apologies would be absurd. It's a great comic. It was originally published in the 3-volume edition. This was not the cover of any of them. This is the cover of the combined edition. The 3-issue comic series was published by Eclipse. And it's a bit of an interesting story, I think, how it came to be. So, the story was adapted from the original by Chuck Dixon. And I've got to say, he did a pretty amazing job. It doesn't compare with the original, of course, because it's storyboards and storyboard type writing. There's things that you can't do with a comic that happen beautifully in a actual book. In the beginning, I think he does really well. You've got nice, clean shots and scenes like this with beautiful scenery and just enough information to be going along with. You often have Gandalf acting as the narrator instead of just doing saying what Gandalf says in the book. And that works well enough. It probably works better for someone who hasn't read The Hobbit or hasn't read The Hobbit recently, so you don't have that glaringly obvious difference that I knew I'd get and I did it anyway. Where Chuck Dixon does fall down a little bit is later on in the comics, Smaug, Dale, that sort of area. At that point, you've got too much narrative, and there's not really a lot you can do with that. So you end up with a lot of writing that's a script that isn't easy to read, and very small amount of picture by comparison. I don't think he did a bad job with it, though. I think it's a really difficult book to concise down, and yeah, that part was done well. There's a little bit of a bibliography at the back about Charles Dixon. He was an author of children's book for Golden Books and Walt Disney. Did original stories and series. Anyway, he did really well with this one. I might actually try and seek out some of his actual novels and read after this. Then we've got the illustrator, that's David T. Wenzel. I believe that Wenzel was passionate about Lord of the Rings. I hope I've got the right artist here. And he was already doing illustrations from them when he was studying. Yes, there you go. So, as a young boy, David Wenzel knew he wanted to be an artist, and then he went to Hartford Art School and read The Hobbit, and he knew he wanted to be an illustrator, and The Hobbit had been a big part of his life from that point. He'd been doing illustrations in school, which he actually showed. An interesting thing, he says, back then there were no illustrations. Now, there've always been illustrations for The Hobbit, so he might have first encountered The Hobbit in one of those intermediate prints like my print. The deck doesn't have actual illustrations involved. So anyway, he had prints in the gallery, and that drew his attention to a publisher, and he illustrated The Hobbit. I think he illustrated a lot of other things. He illustrated Middle-earth, The World of Tolkien, illustrated by Lynn Carter. Lynn Carter's a big name in science fiction. I imagine that's pretty good. I don't know that I've ever seen it. And you've got an assistant editor, Sean Deming, and the Bill Pearson looks like he was the letterer. The lettering is very good. It manages to get a sort of old-timey feel to it without making it too hard to read. The real joy in this, though, is the illustrations. The illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. Here's one of the trolls just before Bilbo gets snatched. The drawings are spectacular in the old school. So they're dynamic, they're organic, the colouring is spectacular. You've got a depth and a richness to the illustrations that you just don't tend to have in a lot of modern comics, which are probably on more of a timeline than these were. This is a picture of Mirkwood. The only thing wrong with the picture of Mirkwood is it makes it look so beautiful you want to go there on holiday, which was not the Mirkwood at all that Tolkien envisaged. He does some other things really well. The giant spiders of Mirkwood he does really, really well. I don't know what technique's called, but he uses lots of lines, so instead of just an outline of thing, he uses outlines to make them feel scratchy and sketchy. He envisaged a few things quite differently from me. One is Bjorn. I don't think Bjorn is done justice as a character. As a character, I always envisaged him as a really strong, hale, hearty man. Here he looks a little bit stooped and he seems to be wearing a singlet, and I don't know what he was doing with Bjorn. I imagined, if you could imagine the full strength and dynamic posture of a bear in human form, not this stooped old guy, so I don't know what he was envisaging there. He does a great job with the Hobbit, though he makes him look like a human. I never envisaged the Hobbit as a human. That again, here's an illustration of when the Hobbit's first talking to Gandalf. It's beautifully drawn. It's very true to the book. Not the way I'd envisaged it. I imagined a Hobbit as not looking quite human because, arguably, integral to the story, they're not. And what else? So he also illustrates outside the square quite a bit. For its era, a lot of illustrations happened within a square box. He obviously could think outside the square. Images like that are very dynamic. He failed to use that sort of dynamic line when it came to Smaug the Dragon. The dragon is always drawn within a square, and I think the artistry could have been more effective if he'd been sort of bursting out of that a bit more. But he did use the most amazing range of reds to make Smaug glow on the page. I don't know how he did it. It's really, really beautiful. All the artwork's really beautiful. Some of the line work puzzles me. All of his elves look old. And as I see elves, as they're described in Lord of the Rings, I'm not sure about the Hobbit so much, but in Lord of the Rings they're described as eternally youthful. So you've got Elrond of Rivendell, who's a really, really hundreds and hundreds of years old half-elf, but still looks youthful. Every single elf in here has just got lines everywhere around their eyes, around their mouth. It's making them all look like old humans. I don't quite get why. Still, he's doing his thing. The goblins, as they're described in The Hobbit rather than orcs, are amazing. These are the images of goblins that every children's story has ever tried to illustrate. I will try and find... I'm not going to be able to find one. The beautiful green-skinned, snarly, squirmy, weird, perfect orcs. Gollum's okay. I've imprinted very heavily on the first Gollum from the first Lord of the Rings from ages ago. I like the one in the new one, of course. The one in the new movies was great, but the Gollum from the original ones is still how I think of Gollum. And because this was a kid's book, I assume they've illustrated Gollum wearing strange red raggledy trousers. I suppose you couldn't have a naked figure in a children's book. Anyway, gorgeous artwork. It's not The Hobbit. It didn't quite fill that need, but it was very enjoyable. And anyone who does enjoy The Hobbit, I'd suggest they go out and seek out this particular one volume trade paperback is good, or the 3 volume originals if you can. Maybe treat yours better than mine. Mine's obviously had many, many hard years of being read and carried around and fixed. Still a great accompaniment to Tolkien. Not as good as, but enjoyable in its own right.